All right, this is exciting because we have our first ever cardiologist on the Leaders Who Care series. So, Suzanne, a lot of pressure to bring even more heart to the table here, which I know you will show that you are clearly a leader who cares, but the heart and soul is going to come through like no tomorrow. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be the first cardiologist here. My name is Dr. Suzanne Steinbaum. I was not always a doctor or a cardiologist. And in fact, when I go back in time, I really started in the arts. And I was a dancer who sang and acted. And I go back to high school. Really, I was always constantly in two different worlds. I was a cheerleader. I mean, that's the thing that not everyone knows about me. I love to choreograph. And so I was making up dances for the cheer squad, but I was also in AP Bio and AP English and, really just split down the middle doing all those things. And one of my favorite memories in college, I went to Tufts University, was being in a chemistry lab and I had dance rehearsal right after lab. So I had my boom box with my
Zumba.
tape cassette, with my special song that I choreographed to. I was wearing leg warmers and at the bench lighting a Bunsen burner, ready to go to rehearsal. So my whole life has really just been being in two different worlds all the time and constantly seeing things from an artistic lens, even being in science. And I've been told from day one, gee, you seem different than usual cardiologists. And I'm always like, thank goodness. But I think it really comes from that, just the beginning of looking at the world and the work and people from a very different way than just simply through that scientific lens.
Why do I picture flash dance with seeing you in your leg warmers and the chemistry thing or something like that, and you go
Yeah,
dancing while the thing lights up or whatever?
I kind of thought back then that I was Flashdance. I felt that.
Why not? It's a
Why
great.
not? Didn't
It's a,
every girl that age who was dancing want to be her? That was the thing.
yeah, and every guy wanted to date her too. I mean, so all of that was going on. No, that's pretty interesting. Did you like chemistry class?
I did. I mean, I loved the concept of being able to follow a pathway to do something and have a specific outcome. I thought that was really cool. And I think that algorithmic thinking became something that was integrated in who I was going to be, for the rest of my career. How do you streamline things? How do you look at things? But then how do you take that algorithm and turn it upside down and bring in other variables that are not even considered? And I think that's been like my favorite part of not talking about my career and my business, but been my favorite part of how I've approached like everything in my life.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that. I remember a teacher with one of my sons actually. He played baseball. He was good in geometry, but he also knew about dance. And for the people that were in dance that hated geometry and the people that were in geometry that hated dance, he showed them how they were connected to each
Yeah.
other. And they then you started learning about it and you got interested in it and stuff like that. And where things are derived is I think one of the biggest things in education of all time. If you know where things came from and then what can you do with them is kind
Yeah.
of what makes me think about what you were talking about. It's brilliant. So what were you like as a kid and a teenager? Were you playing the game Operation way back when, or were you into dance, obviously? But what else?
I it really depends on what age. I was really I loved I loved performing. I loved speaking. I was an announcer in middle school. Like I started off the day, hey, good morning, everyone. I really, I loved just engaging with people, and really that was always one side of me. And then the other side, I think I was a little shy in some ways. And when I say that to people, they're like, "You're not shy." And I'm like, "But you don't know how I feel on the inside."
Right. It's true though. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Um,
that's always been a little odd piece of the story because I'm not to the normal person. You would never think there's anything about me that's shy.
it depends what your definition of normal is also.
Right.
Um, so there's a lot to be said for we all have some extrovert and introvert in us and whichever one takes over. I know a lot of I'm generally an extrovert, but I'm also a big time introvert and I need that time to do that, which gives me energy for the other time and stuff. So I don't know how that affects our heart. Maybe you can tell us.
Yeah, I think it's important. And there's certain things that happened in my life that really affected how I really thought about the heart. When I was in college and I was studying dance, I minored in dance. And as much as I did the science, I was really focused on this connection between the mind and the body that was so clear to me. I was working in a pediatric hospital in child life and really using art and using dance as a way to help children understand their healthcare journey. And so for me, that integration started way before I ended up where I ended up. Um, I always love to write. I think that my big secret, I ended up writing a book, and everyone's like, "How'd you write a book?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I've been doing that my whole life, you know." And again, I was always split brained. I would get A's in English and A's in science. I was doing both things and had a very distinctive either confusion or advantage in connecting those two areas. But I remember being I got to throw in the career thing. I was the East Coast site for the Lifestyle Heart Trial, which was Dean Ornish's research on prevention of cardiovascular disease that he was running out of San Francisco. And we were doing it at Beth Israel Medical Center on the East Coast. And this was looking at diet and exercise and stress management and the effects on cardiovascular and atherosclerotic regression. So, getting rid of plaque in the arteries through these lifestyle things. And I was standing in a room and we had patients on the floor doing yoga. And I'm telling them about breathing and I'm talking about yoga. And all of a sudden, I had this realization, wow, that was a long pathway to get back to dance. I went through medical school, fellowship, residency, the whole thing, all the medical training. And I was like, oh my God, here I am in the same position. Um, that was a really funny moment. But all of that part of who I was as a child and became as an adult and that appreciation for that mind body connection, that has been the foundation of everything that I've done.
Yeah, and as we evolve, probably learning more and more and more how it did all come together. Even though as a little kid you might not have known how it came together or whatever. And so it kind of I don't think things happen by accident. And I see a lot of threads when I do a lot of conversation with people, threads between who they are and what they learned in the environment they were in as a kid and how that and sometimes it's following something and sometimes it's the total rebellion against something or people in the family. But um, I noticed that you did, you got your bachelor's in child development psychology with the minor in dance, and then there was an inflection point to then earn your doctor in osteopathic medicine, or what?
So I think it's always, I don't lead with this, but it's really not fair for me to have a conversation about myself without telling you about my family. I grew up in a family of doctors. My grandfather was the original, and he was told that He had a heart murmur and he couldn't play football. And he thought that was the dumbest thing he ever heard in his entire life. And he wanted to be a doctor, but he didn't want to be that kind of doctor. He wanted to be a doctor that understood that a person is holistically and should be holistically evaluated. And he found osteopathic medicine in the founding school in Kirksville, Missouri, and that's what he did. And with growing up in a family of 18 physicians, my grandfather, my father, my uncles, my cousins, family dinners was like, what's the latest case that you saw? It was just surreal. One of the funniest things that ever happened, we grew up on Lake Hopatcong, New Jersey during the summers. My dad's parents had a house and my mom's parents had a house. My mom grew up in Brooklyn. My dad grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. And my mom had a little speedboat and my dad was pumping gas and they were 16 years old and the rest is history. So I grew up on this lake with both sides of the family and it was a bonding experience. We competed with each other, sailing. We competed with each other in everything in all different age groups, and they're all doctors. And I had a group of friends stay over one night, and my dad and cousins and his first cousins and all the people, they went water skiing. And we come down the stairs, and my father is lying on the dining room table with blood spurting out of his nose and one of my cousins suturing up his face. And my friends were like, "Oh, and bagels in the corner."
It wasn't a brisk, obviously.
No, it was brunch, Sunday brunch. My dad got hurt, and so what do? You just suture up his face. And my friends were like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" I was like, "You guys, how long is this going to take? We want to have breakfast." And they were like, "Oh my God," this
How long is it going to take?
was just normal in the house.
Any
Um,
anesthesia or just sutured the guy?
at that point, I never even asked. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't,
Holy cow.
Um,
On the
lot of
dining room
that,
table.
lot of that. My dad, they were all in private practice. They were family doctors in Bayonne, New Jersey, small town. I think of my grandfather, he was like a doctor and a priest for some people,
Yeah, sure.
they made house calls. I think that I don't know. There must be a couple handfuls of us in the world who, my first day on the planet, I knew patience. I never knew life without patience. That was before cell phones. My dad had a beeper, but they all called the house. I knew patience forever. My dad he left private primary care and became an oncologist. And he trained at Sloan Kettering, did the original research on tamoxifen. And I knew nude mice at Sloan Kettering and research. And his patients were people I hung out with. I used to just make rounds with them all the time on weekends. So I knew about people dying when I was 7 and 8 years old. There were patients I knew, and he'd be like, "Oh, do you remember that? I had a watch. I remember this watch I loved that a patient gave to me." And he's like, "She died." And I was like, "Oh my God." And so
Yeah.
that concept was sort of very early in my life. And my father has lived his life like you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And that was a very big part of sort of who I became as I became older. What do you want to do? What are you passionate about? What do you care about? Go for it. Live. Take every day and live. And I have done that for better or for worse, not all the time for better. But I can't say that I haven't tried everything. I've never sat back and thought, what if? I should sometimes have thought, what if? I've always been, let's just do it. Let's go for it if that's what I wanted. I remember him asking me at 4 years old, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I don't know. I think change the world. And every so often he would remind me of that. And why didn't you stop me?
Well, I think we all do change the world in one way or another, maybe little pieces or whatnot, but we can get to influencers later, actually, in respect to that. But it's so fascinating. Do you think you were predestined? I mean, what would have happened if you said, "I want to be a dancer"?
I did say that at one point. And, you know, it was interesting. There was always that pull for me. I was in a pediatric hospital teaching dance and reading every medical textbook I could find about the diseases that the children had I was taking care of. So the cystic fibrosis kid, I knew that his lungs were filled with mucus. So I was creating things that he could breathe better. And I thought about it, from the physiology side. And one of the doctors there was like, what are you doing dancing? I would explain to him the physiology and what I was thinking about. He's like, what are you doing? And so there was always that rub for me. I remember when I went to medical school, I said to my dad, one of the hardest things is thinking, I'm never going to perform, like I'm never going to be on stage again. And it was my first week in my internship, and I got a call from the chief of medicine, and he said, CBS News is here, and they want to do a story about interns and medical care. Do you want to go on the news? And I was like, okay. And and all of a sudden, my whole career in media took off. Um, and my father called and he goes, well, it looks like you're back on stage. And I was like,
I knew it.
there you go. There you go.
But I wonder how much that was supposed to happen. I do believe things happen
Well,
for a reason, and you kind of put yourself in a position that you were that personality that could go out and do that, and you knew how, you took those algorithms and changed them around. You knew how to jump on situations and handle them, and maybe that was the best thing for you to use that experience to be able to share about what you know and be a doctor at the same time, and you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And I think about it often because it hasn't been an easy path. In my cardiology fellowship, I mean, 11% of cardiologists were women when I was going through training. It was not easy. It was not easy. And I used to call my dad once a week, I'm quitting.
Well, it's funny you say that, and we'll come back in a minute, but our firm was actually launched 6 years ago on International Women's Day at the UN headquarters because we were focused on women advancement and leadership and empowerment and all that stuff. And tell us what it was like, as a woman, if you will, in a man's world, which was for a lot of worlds, but especially in something like medicine. How did you navigate? How did you thrive? What did you feel like?
I don't know if I was thriving, to be honest with you. I sort of kind of tried not to thrive in a lot of ways. Um, Kind of get through it and be as invisible as possible in a way.
Hmm.
I tease my family. They're all guys. And
Not
except
one sister, huh?
no, and so I they're now the younger generation. There are a lot of girls, but when I was growing up, it was just the guys. And I would always say, I know how to deal with the guys. I learned how to ignore them very early on.
Um,
I
well,
think that was
that's a
my
shame.
mechanism.
Yeah.
Like just ignore them, keep going.
Did you ever find, if you will, any discrimination as to be given an opportunity versus not?
Yes, lots of discrimination, lots of really tough life lessons. From the first day I walked in, I really had a tough time. It was really challenging, and especially the more senior I became, the harder it became. I found that the men I used to affectionately call them the boys behind their back, and every so often accidentally call it to them in front of their face. okay, boys. Like, that's what, because it was just stupid. Um, I remember when after my cardiology fellowship, I launched a women and heart health program. And
Hmm.
I was pulled into a room by the head of the fellowship, this guy, and he goes, "Hey, come on in," and I closed the door. And I was like, okay. And I closed the door, and
Shouldn't do that anymore.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's another story.
It
But
is.
yeah, he said to me, "So this is a marketing ploy? This is all about marketing? Is that what you're doing?" And I was devastated. Here, as hard as it was to get where I was marginalized constantly. And, the next day I showed up with a stack this big of documents and research and papers. And I said, "This is for your reading so you understand that women are misdiagnosed and mistreated. And here's the research behind it." And, he never really talked to me again, to be honest. It was just a lot of that. I found do what I say, and if you don't do what I say, you're gonna be dismissed. I found out later on in life, my salary was about 50% less than the lowest paid guy in the system. I mean, I can go on and on and on about all the things that you think about that I don't want to talk about, get your hand off of that body part, please, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was just part of the deal. The question was, how much were you going to let it upset you? And what were you going to do about it? And for a really long time, I did nothing and just like kept going, kept going. And I think for me, every so often, again, I'd call my father and be like, "Why didn't you tell me what was going to happen?" So I think part of my biggest naivete, I grew up in the hospitals. I grew up around male doctors my whole life. And so I had no sense of a hierarchy or the potential. So if I had a problem, I would go to the chief. I didn't think I'm an intern. I need to go to my resident who's going to go to the senior resident who's going to. So I kept getting in trouble all the time for reasons that I didn't understand. And at one point, I was like, "Dad, why didn't you tell me that I shouldn't talk to that doctor?" And I had to talk. And he's like, what? Like, I had no common sense. And still,
Yeah,
the,
but
no,
it's
there was no malintention. It was just,
sure.
I just didn't realize it.
Well, sometimes, if you will, sometimes ignorance is bliss and really good because it doesn't stop you, or your brain doesn't stop you from doing stuff because you shouldn't do it. But then, and it's probably partly a reason to your success right now and what you're able to do because of that attitude. And it's interesting. I saw this is where I get some of my information from a Chicago Med show recently, and this African American young gal had an issue with the woman that was in charge of the ER and everything, and but the woman that was charged with the ER got didn't know that this guy was like sexually harassing her. She was just complimented by it, and but she felt him touching this, touching that, and she didn't do anything. Then she found out the intern under her also had that but didn't say anything, and she didn't want the head one to say anything, but she decided to say something anyway. And then the young one got pissed off because now she's going to be known as the one
Yeah.
that did that. But they ended up coming together and supporting each other, being strong for each other, if you will, to do it. But it's hard in that world to challenge. It's hard to challenge, and yet somebody's got to do it.
I think it was a different time
Yeah,
and it was early on and it was almost accepted.
for sure.
The guys, you'd go in the emergency room, you just, not the ER as much as the operating room. If you were a woman in the OR, you just might as well know that you're going to be harassed in some way. It was just part of the culture, I think. And there was little things, I remember being in a room once, and there was a patient there and a doctor, and there was I was a junior doctor, and there was a guy sweeping the floor, and the patient turned to the guy sweeping the floor and called him doctor, you know,
course.
and and all of the male doctors would call the women doctors by their first name. They never called us doctor. It was just different. And I don't honestly know, and this sounds crazy, it bothered us like behind closed doors, but we never said anything. We absolutely never said anything.
Well, I think everybody had that training, including mothers that stayed home, that that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
They had that training for years, for decades, for centuries, that training. And yeah, I can tell you a lot of examples of women I worked with that I got really close to professionally, and the stuff that they went through, and how to get over it, even in the CPA world, the accounting world, and everything like that. So come a long way, baby, and we just got to keep keep going that way. And was that part of your intent to focus to some degree on women's health?
No, I mean, not even a little bit. It never even crossed my mind.
Hmm.
And I was in my training. I had no idea what I wanted to do. But one of the things that I kind of had experienced in my life, um, I think it's partially because I'm not an aggressive person. I always kind of there were just other women doctors that I worked with, like they were bold, like they stood up for themselves, and I was like, wow, I wish I was more like that kind of thing. And I heard from early on, you're not a doctor. Like, I just was not treated seriously. I was not taken seriously. I was not looked at as like this force that I wanted to be. And
Hmm.
whether it was, I loved clothes, and was it how I dressed, but it was conservative. I don't know. I just don't know what it like all the time what it was. Um and again, it was early on. They weren't used to being around too many women. And
Yeah.
I felt there was this concept. It was like when I was a cheerleader, you know, are you going to be a cheerleader or are you going to be smart? Well, I'm going to be both. And even I remember a teacher, my AP bio teacher, she was like, you're never going to go to Tufts. Don't even try. And she's like, you're a cheerleader. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I am. Like,
Thank you for telling me that, because I am definitely going.
I
And
wore bells on my shoes the next day just to make noise in that class. I was so mad.
then go back for career day and tell them what you did.
I'll tell you, and that is part of the story. I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in Livingston High School, and I got to spend a day going to classes. And I went to one of the classes, well, all of the classes, but the first class was a group of cheerleaders in the football team. And I said, by the way, they were still doing cheers that I choreographed. It was the coolest thing. Like, 25 years later. And I said, you can be whoever it is you want to be. You can be a cheerleader and you can be a cardiologist. You can be whoever you want to be. And I think that that message was something that I had to carry in my heart. But here I was still fighting that stereotype in my life, in my training. I mean, really fighting it. And I was in the emergency room and I was watching women being wheeled in. There was one day, it was like, I'll never forget it. This Oprah's aha moment day, There's a 53-year-old woman. I tell this story all the time. She had chest pain. She was nauseous. I don't know. I'm not going to call it chest pain. She was holding her chest. She was nauseous, holding her stomach, sweating. She was very uncomfortable. And she was brought into the emergency room, evaluated by the doctor in charge, and put in the corner with the diagnosis of gastroenteritis. Where at that moment in the corner of the emergency room, she proceeded to have a heart attack. And now I'm like looking at these doctors and I really respected them. Like, you guys, look what's happening. That wasn't the first time. I kept seeing it. And it was like, is anyone seeing this? Just because she's a woman doesn't mean she's not having a heart attack, because we thought of this as a man's disease. And I think it was a very unconscious thing. It took me a little time to figure out, but women were being stereotyped. It
Sure.
was how I was living my life. And I felt like I'm going to fight for these women because I know how this feels. I know who they are. I'm not going to let this happen. And I stalked the chief of cardiology, literally stalked him. I'm like, I got to meet with this guy. I got to tell him my plans and what I'm going to do. And it took a long time to get a meeting with him. And I said, I want to do a fellowship on women and heart disease. And he looked at me and he goes, there's no such thing. And I said, I want to do a fellowship in preventive cardiology. If I prevent women from getting heart disease, that'll be how I save them. And he looked at me and he said, there's no such thing. But talk about right place, right time, how things happened, how I ended up at that hospital. It is just amazing to think of all of the moving pieces that made that happen.
Hmm.
He was doing Dean Ornish's research on preventive cardiology. And I got one of the first CGME approved cardiology fellowships in this country.
Yes.
It was amazing. And all of a sudden, my world opened up. It was like it went from gray to like rainbow colored sunshine. Like I get to really change things. I get to really create and have an impact in healthcare. And the deeper I got, it was the beginning of Go Red for Women through the American Heart Association, right at the same time. It's like that tipping point was happening.
Hmm.
It's like there. And my big joke is I wasn't invited to be a spokesperson. I just wouldn't leave them alone. Like, I'm wearing red and I have a lot to say. And, okay, come on. It was so early. And I became a spokesperson, a national spokesperson for Go Red for Women for 20 years, part of the American Heart Association. And that became such a huge part of my identity and who I was and what I mattered. And I go around New York to this day and I go, I spoke in that building, I spoke in that building, I was there, I did that. Thousands of buildings across the country. I wrote a book and really I allowed my heart open to the condition of women in a way that I wasn't that person in college in terms of I'm going to be for women's issues. I wasn't that person.
But maybe that person was in you, and I'm not talking like woo woo here or whatever, but things happen. I mean, just the fact that the dance, I love these threads, and it may sound ridiculous, but
Yes.
the
Yes.
dance is being creative, being open, being free, being heart, doing different moves or whatever you want to call it. These things impact people, and that's why I think it's good for people to actually study different things because you get certain elements that come into your main play, if you will, or your main core.
The essence of the work I do right now, the essence of prevention for all people is on the health of the lining of the artery. It's called the endothelium. And if we keep the endothelium healthy, then we don't get heart disease.
Hmm.
80% of the time, heart disease is preventable, and it's based on these risk factors like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, elevated sugars. But think about it. How do we manage those things? If we diet and exercise the right way, then we have health of the lining of the artery. So, where I sit today after all these years is an expertise in exercise physiology. I learned that in college. Like,
It just took everybody a long time to get to the point,
to
and
catch up, right? So I do believe that every single part of my life, every little piece that happened from performing
I
to
agree.
being on stage to understanding how to communicate with people. That all started when I was in middle school, and it just got perfected throughout college. By the time I was speaking and on stage and on television, actually, this one guy from ABC News, he called me in and he said, I just want to see if you'd be good to be on television. I didn't even finish my training at this point. I don't even know how I got into that room. Oh, I think it was from the CBS thing. And he started asking me questions and I answered. And he looked at me and he goes, were you in the theater? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, ah, now you got to finish your training and we'll call you back when you're a doctor. Like that kind of
Well,
thing.
I think that's so true. When we're in kids in school and all the kids say, I hate school, I hate this, I hate that. But there's pieces of every little thing that where you derive some knowledge from, or like the geometry is like dancing and dance is like geometry. And I think our brain has a way of putting them together sometimes, even though like you said, they're separate. I think our brain has a way maybe of sometimes having it go like that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the benefit of one helps the other.
You want to hear the craziest connection?
Okay.
Organic chemistry. Like everyone said, it was the hardest class. I spent my life choreographing dances. In my mind, everything was three-dimensional. I saw movement and pictures and how things were interacting as a choreographer. I don't think I studied for organic chemistry. It was just three-dimensional figures, and this connected here just like dancers.
There you go.
So here's the crazy thing. Cardiology is the same thing. I can see everything. It is so visually in my head, the heart and how it all moves, that it was the easiest thing for me to understand and learn. And it all goes back to dance. Don't tell anyone.
We won't, I promise. Um, it's so fascinating and so cool if you
Yeah.
think about it. And you know, I mean, your efforts to get through all the hard stuff, um, but it was worth it because you're making a difference right now. And with that, I want to talk about your passion for, you know, hard tech health and what you're doing there, which is also pretty cool and pretty bold. You know, tell us about it starting and tell everybody what it is.
Yeah. It's funny when I think of like every step that I've taken. It's that idea that I talked about of, live for the day. What do you want? What matters? And I was sitting in a great hospital in New York, and here I am with this agenda. And this agenda was I wanted to change heart disease for women. 1 in 3 women die of heart disease more than all cancers combined. I have been saying that through Go Red for Women for 20 years. And here I'm in this major hospital, and I have this idea of prevention and all these years of having to figure it out and how to do it, and thought if we can do it in this hospital system, we can change how healthcare is delivered. And I was so excited. And then I got there and it wasn't going to happen. And it wasn't going to happen because of politics. And it wasn't going to happen for every single reason that we don't even want to think about. We're really a treatment generated society, not a prevention generated one. We don't
Yeah.
want to prevent, we want hospitals make money from
Well,
sickness,
the we is certain parts, not the rest of us. Right.
but it wasn't appealing enough to that hospital. And so I left and I was like, that's it. That's it. I've had, what, if anyone said, stop, think this through, that would have been nice. Um,
At least try to keep me, right? But great.
So I left the hospital and I went into private practice, and I was in private practice for 2 months and COVID hit. Well, this was interesting because for the first time in like 20 years, I had to sit down, which and like stop moving, which was fascinating because um I hadn't actually stopped like that. And in 2 months, so I moved in with my parents at the lake house, and took my son, and we were there. And I ended up setting up a virtual clinic in their basement. I sent out blood pressure cuffs to all the patients, got a telemedicine platform, learned how to create a virtual practice. I didn't know it from any of this. And in after I would see patients, I started writing a manual on how to prevent heart disease in women based on all the research, all my data. I started collecting everything. My parents were screaming, "Can't you watch Netflix like the rest of the people?" And I was like, "Busy, stop, what are you doing? Relax." I heard that for months. And at the end of this, 90 pages, 12-page bibliography, how to prevent heart disease in women. I gave it to my father and I was like, read this with a critical eye and let me know. And he read it with that critical eye, that research eye, and went through it. And he's like, "Oh my God, I think you did it." And I submitted to the Library of Congress. I got copyrighted by the Library of Congress. Call my friend, find me a tech company. I am going to put this on a tech platform. And I am going to launch this throughout the United States of America. So there is access and equity for all women, no matter where they live, what their education, their socioeconomic status. I want to change healthcare for women, and the time is now. And Adesso, which means now in Italian, was the first product that Heart Tech Health launched. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about Heart Tech Health.
Yes.
It was, I have absolutely no idea why. It might have been 2016. I said to my son is now 18 years old. So he was a little kid. And, he's like 9 years old. And I was like, "Spencer, I have a feeling I'm going to start a technology. I don't know. Technology is the future. And I think that I'm going to need a tech company when we figure out our technology solution. What should I call it?" And he's like, "Heart Tech Health." I was like, "Ah, perfect." So right then and there, I developed an LLC, Heart Tech Health, 2016, never used it, totally forgot about it. And then all of a sudden in COVID, and I was like, wait, Spencer, we started a company. It was like that. And I didn't know what I was going to name this solution, but eventually Adesso was born. And Adesso, again, it means now in Italian. If the time is not now, I don't know when it is. I heard this Italian song I loved, and the chorus said, "Adesso, Adesso, Adesso." It was this beautiful love song, now, now, now. And I was like, "Ah, this is the name. This is the name." But it came out of that artsy side of myself, just the passion of a song. And if the time is not now, I don't know when. And what I did was really created that testing algorithm to be in a physician portal that a physician can take a patient through a series of tests that took me, 15 years to figure out how to really diagnose endothelial dysfunction, microvascular disease, the true problems that women have before they develop overt heart disease, clinically relevant heart disease like a heart attack. And we are now launched in ACOs and in clinics in the United States, slowly growing to have primary care doctors. Now, I went to my family, all of these primary care doctors, and I said, "Would you use this?" I think my grandfather would probably be like, "Wow." And the other piece of it, it's not just about disease. It's about who you are and who you are in the context of your life. And we have an app that's education, it's self empowerment, and then it's advocacy. How do you speak to your doctor so you get what you need? So you don't get stereotyped, so you don't become a woman who's fine, or a cheerleader that couldn't be a doctor because that's the way it was. And this idea of empowering women and educating the primary care doctors, because I know they can take care of these women if they're given the tools and they're given the way to do it. And that's what Adesso is about, empowering them for better outcomes to take care of their patients, retain their patients, and really knowing who needs a cardiologist and who doesn't, and what to do. And those recommendations are given, and the testing is given, and the women are empowered through an app. And that COVID virtual program that I set up in the basement, that's part of it too, with remote patient monitoring and learning how to use those
Sure.
devices and data. And that's all integrated into this entire ecosystem that we created with Adesso.
Well, I said you were going to bring a lot of heart and soul into this when we started. And so, first of all, congratulations. You must have been, I can't even imagine the feeling you and your dad had when he said that to you, that you did it, type of thing. I mean, that's, again, I compare a lot of things to sports, and every kid that's on the field or on the ice always looks up when something happens to their parents and see what they say. And so I can imagine the feeling had to be spectacular, for forever to be remembered. Um, so the ask now is you need more funders, and you need to grow this. And so everybody that's seeing this, give us a call and we can chat with you about it. I can and we can introduce you to the famous dancer. I have one last question. It's not my last question, but in LA we say we leave them wanting more, so you can make a sequel. So we'll have to do a sequel at some point. But with everything that's gone, and it's so wonderful to hear the story. From COVID even and to now. It's already 2025. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
So I launched a company as a cardiologist and became a CEO and founder, and had literally no idea what I was doing. People said, "Well, how long did it take you to write the business plan?" I was like, "What?" I have to say, I did bring on a team of people. I called my friends, and I have friends who were really able to jump on board, and a chief financial officer and a marketing strategist, and really been able to. Actually, in college, I was on the sailing team, and the guy I sailed with, he's he's my business strategist. I mean, we've been fighting since we're 18. It's perfect.
Right.
So I really I'm really lucky. I think it's the hardest thing I've ever done, to really take something in my mind and bring it to life, and raise money and have people say to me, "Why do you think you can do this? You're not a CEO, you're a doctor." And it's like, here we go again.
The
And
best answer is, yeah, but I'm a great dancer.
yeah, well, the best answer is, because I've done it over and over again in every single phase of my life. Because I will make sure, if I don't know what I'm doing, I will find the right people to make it successful. When you go into something with purpose and with passion, it's not about your ego. This is not about me. I will not be okay until I change healthcare for women in this country. I said it when I was 4. I said it again, in my 20s. And, it's like 35 years later. I don't know. I make up numbers. I'm not exactly sure, but
We get the gist.
50 years later, and here I am. And I'm not going to give up. I'm going to iterate and do what it takes. I think the thing that I've become most grateful for is that I feel optimism. I always try to find hope. And I'm surrounded by patients to this day. I still see patients part-time. I feel so lucky that I get to be a cardiologist, and I get to be inside of people's hearts, metaphorically. It is the most vulnerable relationship in some ways, because people trust me with their health. and I get to go on a journey with them. I have learned so much about so many different aspects of life lessons personally. I've seen the world through so many different eyes. I feel so grateful to be able to have gone through life like that. Um,
What are you most hopeful for?
that I can change healthcare in this country for women. I can't tell you when I say that what that feels like. So every day when I have a really bad day and I think, oh my God, what did I do to myself? And oh my God, I have investors. And oh my God, is this gonna like, and then I go, deep breath. But you can change healthcare in this country for women. Okay, here we go.
Well, I'm definitely grateful for a new friend, really good friend. I'm definitely grateful because I think you've changed it already, and you're changing even more than healthcare by what you're talking about and how you talk about it. And probably that's the same thing I'm hopeful for because I think you're going to keep doing it. And if you ever think of not to, me and probably a whole bunch of other people will tell you, no, you're not going anywhere. You're going to keep changing and stuff. Um, Thank you for being a leader who cares. Thank you for sharing all that with us, and we will definitely have to have a sequel. So, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure for sure.